When we're talking about nurturing, what does that mean? What does a nurturing parent look like?
Well, a nurturing parent is someone who is attentive to the child, is focused on meeting the child's needs, thinks about the child as sort of a top priority, and is interested in fostering and facilitating their positive development, and can do this in a way that is encouraging, firm but not harsh, and provides sort of non-contingent support so that the parent is loving or admiring or validating of the child regardless of whether the child follows their expectations and rules.
Is it someone who isn't a strict parent?
Not necessarily. You could be a very nurturing and strict parent as long as you aren't a harsh and punitive parent.
Do you think as a society, are parents more nurturing as the years go on, like in this day and age, or are we less nurturing, less attentive?
It's hard to say. I mean, that's really sort of an important question that would need to be studied. I think that there are reasons to believe that parents are more distracted and less attentive to their children, just given sort of the multiple demands of society, all the different kinds of forms of digital media that people pay attention to. So there's definitely a concern about that.
So can that be harmful, being distracted?
Definitely, because part of being nurturing is being present, being attentive, being engaged.
What did you look at in this study?
What we looked at, this is actually originally designed as a study that looks at early childhood depression, and it followed kids who were healthy and kids who had symptoms of depression from early childhood into later childhood, and now we're actually still following the sample into late adolescence. We both looked at the child's behaviors, their emotions, their psychosocial functioning. We looked at the parent-child relationship because we think of that as being sort of the linchpin of the child's positive development. And then we also looked at later brain development by doing serial brain scans on these kids. What we discovered when we were really primarily trying to look at the effects of being depressed on brain development was that there were very powerful effects of the psychosocial environment on brain development as well. One of the things that we discovered was that the level of psychosocial advantage or disadvantage measured by income to needs or poverty had a powerful impact on brain development. We kind of just stumbled upon that because we were controlling for it, and we found it had a very positive effect, a very powerful effect. The other thing we also looked at, and this was more hypothesis driven, was the idea that children who experienced nurturing parenting during the preschool years had more optimal brain development when we looked at their brain scans at school age. So the two major findings from that were the fact that nurturing and supportive parenting experienced early in life has a material effect on the development of brain structures evident at school age. We also did another study where we looked at the relative impact of nurturing parenting during the preschool period and then later in life, and we found that the preschool period was a particularly important time for children to experience nurturing parenting.
More so than later.
More so than later.
Tell me, what is the hippocampus? What does it do?
That's a region of the brain that's involved in memory, cognition, and also emotion regulation. So to have a well-developed hippocampus is a very important thing for functioning in all kinds of domains.
So this can be linked to perhaps higher IQs, but also higher social intelligence, emotional intelligence as well?
Probably more linked to the latter than IQ. Maybe better memory. It's more linked to memory than it would be IQ per se.
Can you tell me where and when was this study published?
That particular finding, there were two papers on that finding. They were both published in PNAS, Proceedings for the National Academy of Sciences.
Were you surprised by any of these findings, and why?
I mean, yes and no. On the one hand, it doesn't surprise me because just based on my 27 years of experience as a child psychiatrist, I know how critically important a primary caregiver is to a child's psychological state and development. So that wasn't surprising because it was completely consistent with everything I've been taught and everything I've witnessed and experienced in my clinical work. What's maybe more surprising was that it had such a tangible mark in the brain. I mean, one could have expected that to be so, but that was what was a bit more new and what the general public hadn't necessarily known existed.
Were there percentages of how much bigger the hippocampus was?
We looked at that, and it's on the order of 8 to 10% bigger.
Let's say parents out there listening to this, is it too late, or can there still be an effect?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think we'd certainly say it's never too late. I mean, ever, you know, even if you're 45, it's not too late. I think the issue is there's certain times during the course of development when nurturing has a more penetrating and powerful effect. And that was really what the study showed, that it's never too early, that's for sure. And a goal can be achieved much more easily when it's attempted earlier as opposed to later. So a good example of that is, for example, language learning. If you tried to teach a 4-year-old how to speak Spanish, and you immerse them in an environment where people are speaking Spanish, they would learn it very, very easily. If you put a 45-year-old in that same environment, they could learn Spanish, but it's going to be a lot harder.
For parents listening to this, what's the takeaway information for them?
The bottom line for parents is that their role as parents is a tremendously important and powerful thing. It's not something that should be thought of as secondary. It's not something that should be thought of as something that can be put on autopilot. Children need more than just being clothed and fed and be sheltered. They really need the support, attention, validation, guidance from their parents. And it's sort of like as essential as feeding your child. It's as essential as your child getting vitamins and nutrients. I mean, this is really the important substrate for growing a healthy child.
Are there tips for people who want to be more nurturing, but maybe it doesn't come super innately to them? Are there everyday things that you'd suggest parents do that would have an effect?
I think it's important to set aside time to spend with your child, even if it's 5 minutes. Just to spend a certain amount of time every day just focusing on your child. What is your child experiencing? What are they worried about? What are they thinking about? What are they challenged by? How do they feel about themselves? To sort of focus on being interested in that, trying to put yourself in your child's shoes, thinking about what their life experience is like, and trying to empathize with that. The other thing that I think is important for parents to do is to listen to how their child feels. And instead of saying things like, don't feel that way, or don't cry, or that to really sort of allow the child to experience emotions and to help the child regulate and manage those emotions.
Do you think that most people do parent that way?
Well, there probably aren't, and people can always do that more. On the other hand, the beauty of parenting is that you don't have to be a perfect parent. I mean, that's the other thing that's been proven. You don't have to do everything right 24 hours a day. You just have to do enough good parenting. So it doesn't mean that you always have to meet your child's needs, or you always have to be empathic with your child, or you have to be available every time your child wants you. You just have to be enough available, and you have to be there enough so that your child has confidence that if they really need you, they could access your attention and support.
Tell me who funded this research?
It was funded by the National Institute of Mental Health.
Based on the study, what do you think needs to be looked at next?
I think what we now need to do, and what we're actually hoping to do in another study that we're doing, is we have to actually start looking earlier in life. So our study started at age 3 and is going on until later adolescence. I think we have to start looking at the effects of parenting in earlier childhood, really from birth up to age 3. And that would be what we're really focused on is this idea of neuroplasticity, a time when the brain is very rapidly changing and very sensitive to environmental inputs. And I think the idea is that the younger you go, the more neuroplasticity there will be, the more sensitivity to the environment there will be. So I think going younger is an important next step.
What would you like policymakers to know about the work you and your colleagues here are doing?
I do think it has huge policy implications because it really sort of shows us that there's a key ingredient towards growing healthy children. I mean, so if we were a corporation and we were trying to grow crops, we would really think about what are the things that really help us have a positive yield. And you know, as a society, we have to think about how we can grow well-developed, well-regulated, emotionally healthy children. And I think what we've clearly landed upon is the idea of focusing on parenting and valuing parenting as a society and changing public policies so that we can help people learn how to parent, help people understand what's important, help people who are facing adversity and stress, how to parent under those conditions. It's really a single focus and target that is very achievable.
This is something that it doesn't require any money from a parent. It's not an expensive thing to do.
No, it's not an expensive thing to do. That's right.
It's just time. Could this result in kids turning into teens and adults who are more empathetic, more nurturing themselves?
That is another important next step. I mean, we know from animal studies that where a very similar phenomenon has been shown, that when animals are nurtured by their mothers early in life, they also develop bigger hippocampuses. And we know from those animal studies that those animals then go on to be more nurturing parents to their own offspring. We haven't yet done a study like that in humans, but there's certainly every reason to believe that that would be true. And that's another downstream payoff. So I think here we're talking about a small investment early that could pay off in spades as time carries on.
Can you tell me about your educational background for undergrad, grad, and do you have a PhD?
MD. So I was an undergrad at Brown University, and then I went to medical school at Wayne State in Detroit, and then I did my residency and child psychiatry fellowship at Stanford.